Hello, you're watching the Single Malt Review. I'm Dave.
Tim.
And now Tim, it's been a very special weekend for you, hasn't it? Why don't you
Yes.
tell us about that?
Depressingly significant birthday time for me, sadly. But never mind. I did get to go into my whisky local, Whisky galore, if you're down in the southern hemisphere. Very good drops available there. And got measured up for my cask, as it were. And this is what they found for me. We've got a Glenburgie, 29 years old, 55.3%, distilled broadly when I was 1985. Should be good stuff. Oh yes indeed. Now, let's see what we have.
We've previously talked about Adelphi, the independent bottler, and Cadenhead are another independent bottler.
Very good one. A very old one, in fact. They would say they're the oldest independent bottler, going since goodness knows when, I forget the date, but a long time. And they've been quite consistent over that period. They have recently rebranded into what we see here, lovely square bottles that come in boxes which are rather rubbish, but never mind. The bottles work. Ooh, dear.
Wow.
Now they've got some rather good tasting notes here as well, which take a lot of the detective work out of your whisky. It's going to tell me straight up that it's a bourbon hogshead, one of 222 bottles, distilled in 1985, bottled just last year, 2014.
Now, bourbon hogshead means some enterprising chap took two bourbon casks, broke them down, and with their powers combined made an even bigger Scotch cask.
Made a larger, slightly more robust cask with two new ends on them, so a bit more character, most would say, than using a standard bourbon barrel, which is becoming increasingly common in warehousing these days. But never mind.
That would also mean, I assume, a slower leaching of the flavours into whiskey, because bigger...
A slower maturation, but not by a great deal.
Right.
Because of the new wood on the two ends of the cask kind of offsets the difference in size.
I see.
So it probably rounds out as about the same in terms of how long something would take to mature. However, I think this one has probably matured rather well, because you can just see there, that is one of the more striking colours I have ever seen out of a bourbon hoggy. That's absolutely the colour of promise.
The colour is often used in food, wine and beverage circles of gold, but this actually does look like gold, the actual mineral gold as well, so suspension of gold particles in there. So that's impressively... They're probably showing up on camera, especially not in a bottle where it's a bit more of a dull, a bit more of an India pale ale colour, but in the glass, yeah, that's very lively, very bright, very sunny.
No, it is bright, practically sparkling. Bodes very well for an older whisky, as does the nose. Now we're at 55%, so that's pretty strong, but it's not too fumey. A little bit.
Getting a strong sense of bananas from that. I'm not a banana person, but I do enjoy the smell.
I'm getting that too, and they don't have that on their tasting notes. So either we're banana people, or the nose they had on this wasn't a banana person, but either way, they've got quite a lot of good ones though. They have spiced stewed fruits, apples, brown sugar, dark cherries, and dry earthiness.
I'm getting caramel. There's some nice creamy caramel on
It is absolutely a sweet nose.
Wow. More sweet than I expect from bourbon. Usually bourbon you get a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of dry oakiness. This is very sweet, more what I expect from sherry, but...
No, it's wonderfully fruity and
yes,
just wonderfully sweet. It's just dripping with lovely sweet smells. I'm going to water that.
I shall taste without water first, just to see what happens.
Oh dear, now the banana's gone away.
Oh,
They didn't like that water. Maybe that's the problem.
They are definitely still there in the flavour. That was a very big, very sweet hit of fruit. I got bananas, I got plums, I got pineapples, surprisingly. Some spices, cloves and cinnamon, a little bit of Turkish delight, so a bit of a dessert tray thrown in there.
Just a wee bit on the end.
But now I have some water. Yes, they say bananas have disappeared from the nose after the addition of water.
Oh, that's quite delightful. That is as sweet as the palate suggested.
And the water is even brought out the sweetness. That's a very desserty whiskey, that. Whether your dessert is fruit or sweets, confectionery, spices. Cloves and cinnamon. Two of my favourites.
That's really very good.
Oh yes.
That is one of the better whiskies I've tasted for a few years, actually. And a real surprise too. Glenburgie. I don't think I've ever had a Glenburgie before. Not a common thing to
Certainly
see
not heard of
in
them
Bond.
until this occasion.
I'm sure there's no Glenburgie by Glenburgie. I may be wrong, but I shall assume this is probably mostly for blending. So it's quite lucky of us to get a
I'd say people
entire
have
bottle.
been drinking those blends, good luck to them. And for those who have been missing out on this by virtue of them not having bottled in their own right, well, it's good to have this opportunity thanks to Cadenheads.
No, it was probably swept in and saved it from a bottle of Johnny Walker 30-year-old just in time.
There's a lovely finish too. It's very light, just evaporates off the tongue for me. Lots of pineapple, but a hint of icing sugar too, just a bit light, spritzy, sugary, evaporate. It just goes. It just wafts away.
Well, it's still
Evaporates
sweet,
off
and there's
down
a
the
good
throat.
sort of an orange peel just slowly drifting away. The finish isn't quite as long as I thought it might be, but it's exceptionally pleasant.
Indeed.
It almost reminds me of some of the better old, maybe even an old brewer, without the smoke. It's difficult to place. These funny wee distilleries that potter away producing sometimes an astonishing quantity of whiskey all year that we never see, I think are some of the most fascinating ones to taste. Ones that would only ever end up as sort of maybe 10% of a blend at most, and that's the only time you'd ever see it, and you'd not be able to pick it out. But many of these distilleries produce lovely, lovely characterful whiskies that if you just taste them on their own, I think so many people would be surprised at what wonderful single malts
Indeed.
they can produce. And this is a testament to that. They don't all have to be Macallans and Glenlivets and Glenfiddichs. They can be things you've never heard of.
And curiously, it's a Speyside whiskey. I'm not getting a lot of the more characteristic Speyside flavours. I associate Speyside with usually a bit of salt, a bit of seaweed, a bit of cut grass. Not full-on briny iodine of the heavily peated Isla whiskies, but just a little less sweet and a little more, I guess, a few more veggies, a bit more grassland, a bit more sea salt than an island.
Speyside's a bit tricky in that it's a very small area, but there's oodles of distilleries going on there. So they pick their own styles, and some of them pick differently. Some do a tiny bit of peat like Cragganmore, and some do no peat at all. I'm not detecting any peat in this necessarily, but without knowing the distillery's practices, I really don't know for sure. If there is any, it's extremely subtle. And of course, Glenburgie has recently been rebuilt, so this is now an old style. Now, it was rebuilt in 2003. I don't know if they kept the stills, but they certainly didn't keep the building. That has been thoroughly bulldozed, so never mind, I suppose. Still producing. And, yes, lovely stuff, I think.
There are a lot of good ways to celebrate one's 30th birthday, but this is probably one of the better ones.
No, it's going to work for me.
Superb accompaniment.
And unless we're very greedy with it, we can celebrate my 31st with it as well.
Indeed.
Oh, lovely stuff. Anyway, before we go on too long, take us out with the scores.
That is a difficult one to rate. It's a very unique Speyside. The sheer age of it and the fact that it's a distillery whose whiskey you normally cannot get on its own. I have no choice but to give this one a solid 8.5. It is really complex. It's very sweet. It's very big. It's 8.5 because of the sheer quality, the uniqueness, the age, the balance of flavours, the complexity.
I would quite agree. We're getting into a bad habit of this, but an 8.5 is exactly what I'd give it. So, if you're after a very luscious dram, and a
And
very
if you can
sweet
find it.
dram. It may, depending on where you're watching this, still be available at some specialists. One of those 222 bottles may be floating around out there, but don't hold me to it. These ones don't stick around, but sometimes they batch them together, so there may be a Glenburgie of a similar age from a different cask still available. So look around if that sounds like the sort of thing you want.
And if you have had the good fortune to try this, please do tell us what you thought in the comments.
And if there's a whiskey you would like us to have a look at, do tell us, and we'll do our very best to investigate. Well, I think that just about does us.
It does indeed.
Catch us
Thank you
next
for
time.
watching.
Sludger.